How are you guys doing? Today is Saturday, October 16th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to use this episode to do an elite individual profile on Bryce Harper. The elite right fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies turns 29, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to shine light on his accolades, his accomplishments, and everything that Bryce Harper has been able to achieve since the moment that he made his debut in the MLB as a teenager, through the days in which he was named an MVP and up through this amazing season where he very well could have put together another MVP season right here. So with this said, I'm going to take this time to, of course, to go through the amazing career of Bryce Harper and just to give everyone a sense of who this guy is. Just to describe his play, Bryce Harper is one of the few players that's really described as a five-tool player. I'm not sure if I know all the tools, but of course he can hit for contact, he can hit for power, he can run the bases incredibly well, not to mention that he can play defense and he can throw the ball incredibly well. I believe those are the five, but for whatever you really need Bryce Harper to do, Bryce Harper is able to be that guy who he's been that guy who's definitely matured in his at-bats as time has gone on. He's gotten better with taking walks. And, of course, if you pitch it in the zone, of course, he's a player that will drive it far. Not only can this man hit for power, but he's also a very disciplined hitter, not to mention an amazing athlete that can catch virtually every ball and can still run bases if really needed to. So just to give a little bit of background, he's originally from Las Vegas. He's one of the few players to try to go from the MLB after his junior year of high school. It was something crazy like that. He would eventually go on to he would enroll at the College of Southern Nevada in his age 17 season. He would eventually go on to be taken with the first overall selection of the 2010 MLB draft by the Washington Nationals. And just taking a look at the players who was taken in that draft, Manny Machado was taken with the third overall pick by the Orioles. Chris Sale was taken with the 13th pick by the Chicago White Sox. Christian Yelich was taken by the Florida Marlins at that time, just to give a sense of who he was drafted alongside and just how long he's come in the last decade. So like I said, he was drafted by the Washington Nationals. He was eventually called up for the very first time to play as a 19-year-old on the 2012 team. In 2012, Bryce Harper would play 139 games in a season where the Nats would go on to make the playoffs with 98 wins. This is the first time that the Nats made the playoffs as a franchise since they were the Montreal Expos in 1981. This is the second time that they would actually go on to make the playoffs in their franchise history. In Bryce Harper's age 19 season and the 139 games he played, he finished with 144 hits. So even from his first game in the league, he had more hits than games played. He had 98 runs. Very tough to score 90 runs in a season, but he did it as a rookie. He did all of that alongside hitting 26 doubles, 22 home runs, and 59 RBIs. He finished the season with 18 stolen bases, a batting average of .270. And he finished with an OPS of .817. He will go on to be named an All-Star in his very first year in the MLB, which is rare, something you don't see a lot of people doing nowadays. And he will go on to be named the National League Rookie of the Year. So, of course, he was in very incredible company to do that, especially in his age 19 season, especially getting a sense for how good of a player he is. And he played that entire season virtually as a teenager and still ended up showing that he was one of the best players in baseball. To be an all-star as a teenager is a very rare feat to accomplish, so of course he was able to do that. And once they made the playoffs, in the Nationals' very first time making the playoffs as an organization, they would end up losing in the National League Division Series in the Cardinals. And this is the year that the Giants won their second of three, to give a to give a sense of where in time this fit into the baseball timeline. Following Bryce Harper's Rookie of the Year season, he would come back for his second season with the Washington Nationals. In his age 20 season in 2013, he would play 118 games in a season where the Nats would finish with an 86-76 record and miss the playoffs completely. In Bryce Harper's second year in the league, he would go on to be named an All-Star in his age 20 season. In the 118 games he played, he finished with 116 hits, less hits than games played for the first time in his career. He finished with 71 runs on the season alongside 24 doubles, 20 home runs, and 58 RBIs with 40 less games than the max. He would finish with a 274 batting average, and he would finish with a career high at the time, 854 OPS. And as a 20-year-old, he would go on to be named an All-Star for the first 2 years, which would show that he was in sort of rarefied air with what he was doing with the Nats. This would transition into his third season with the Nationals. In his age 21 season, he would only go on to play 100 games in a season where the Nats would go on to finish with a 96-66 record, winning the National League East for the second time that they've been the Washington Nationals. This would be the year where Matt Williams would win the Manager of the Year. But in Bryce Harper's third season, playing the least amount of games he played in a season other than the COVID season. In the 100 games he played, he finished with 96 hits, second consecutive season with less hits than games played. He finished with 41 runs, 13 home runs, and 32 RBIs. He finished the year with a 273 batting average and a 768 OPS, which at the time was about what he was doing with batting average, but his lowest OPS that he's ever put up in his career. His only OPS below 800 in his MLB lifetime. But of course, in the 2014 season, in which he was dealing with a left thumb injury, he would eventually travel to Japan to compete in the the Japan series, but he withdrew. But regardless, following the 2014 season, the Nats would end up losing in the National League Division Series to the eventual champion San Francisco Giants. This is when the Giants won their third in their 5-year span under Bruce Bochy. And following this season, Bryce Harper would go on a very unprecedented run. In Bryce Harper's fourth season in the MLB, his age 22 season, he would probably go down to have his best statistical season to date, other than maybe this season. In Bryce Harper's age 22 season in 2015, he will go on to start he played 153 games for a Washington Nationals team that would go on to miss the playoffs, but Bryce Harper would go on to win the MVP for the only time in his career in 2015, at least to date. That's the only time he's won it. In the 153 games he played, he finished with 172 hits. That's the most hits he's ever put together in a season. He finished with 118 runs to lead the National League, which is also the most runs he's ever put together in a season in his career to date. He finished with 38 doubles, which at that point in his career and before this most recent season is the most doubles that Bryce Harper ever put together in a season. He finished with a triple. He would finish with 42 home runs, which would lead the National League. This would be the only time in his career to date he's led the National League in home runs, and this is the only time that he's led the league, or that he's finished with at least 40 home runs on the season. He would finish with 99 RBIs, which at that point was a career high. The first time he even eclipsed 60 RBIs, he hit 99. He would go on to finish with a 460 on-base percentage, starting with batting average. He finished with a 330 batting average. The first time that his batting average has been above 300 in a season for his career. He finished with a 460 on-base percentage, which led the National Leagues for the only time in his career, and this is the first time he ever posted an OBP above 400. He finished with a slugging percentage of 649. That is the first time in his career he's ever posted a slugging percentage of above 600. And, of course, with these historic OBPs and slugging percentage, which led the National League, he'd finished with an 11.09 .409 OPS, the highest OPS he's ever posted in his career and the first time he's ever led the National League. He also led the National League in OPS plus, which is basically a gauge to measure where his OPS measures along with the league best. The OPS plus, the way it's measured, the average is 100. So if you're like 105, you're 5 points better than average. He finished with an OPS plus of 198, the highest of his career to date. And of course, in addition to winning the MVP, he was gifted the Silver Slugger for the first time in his career. And he was named an All-Star for the third time in his first 4 years in the league. And the case can be made that if he played the full season from the year before, he would have made it, but this year he didn't. But this third year he didn't make the All-Star team, but in his fourth year he did, and he did so even though the Nats didn't make the playoffs, he would establish himself as one of the best all-around players in baseball, the player that many people were expecting when this teenager came into the league. This would transition into Bryce Harper's fifth season in baseball. His fifth season in the MLB was in 2016. And in his age 23 season, he would go on to play 147 games for a Washington Nationals team that would win 95 games and win the National League East for the third time in a 5-year span. This is the year where Max Scherzer won his first Cy Young with the Nationals. And in that season, Bryce Harper would finish with 123 hits in his 147 games following his MVP season. He finished with 84 hits in the 84 runs, in the 147 games. He finished with 24 doubles, 24 home runs, and 86 RBIs, the second most amount of RBIs and home runs he hit, at least at that point, up until that point in his career. He would steal 21 bases, the most bases he'd ever steal in his career, the only time he'd ever eclipsed 20 stolen bases. He finished with a .243 batting average, which is the lowest batting average Bryce Harper has ever posted in his career. He finished with an .814 OPS as well, but he would also go on to be the player who was intentionally walked the most times. In his 5-year career at that point, he would go on to be named an All-Star for the fourth time in his MLB career. And in 2016, he would go on to help the Nats make it to the playoffs, where they would eventually lose to the LA Dodgers, who in 2016 would end up losing to the Chicago Cubs as the Cubs took home the World Series that year. This would transition into Bryce Harper's sixth season with the Washington Nationals in 2017, his age 24 season. He would go on to play 111 games for a Washington Nationals team that finished with a 97-65 record. This is their fourth NL East title that they've won in that 6-year span. They have not and of course to date they have not won an NL East title in the regular season, but they have made the playoffs and won a championship since then. But regardless, in Bryce Harper's sixth season with the team, he finished with 134 hits in the 111 games he played. He finished with 95 runs, eclipsing 90 runs for the third time in his MLB career. He finished with, like I said, in addition to finishing with more hits than games played, with 134 hits to 111 games, 23 more hits than games played. He finished with 27 doubles, which at that point was the second most doubles he ever put together in a season. He finished with 29 home runs and 87 RBIs, which at that point would be the second most home runs and RBIs he put up in a season. He finished with a .319 batting average, which is the second time in a 2-year span he finished the season with a batting average above 300. And he would finish with a .413 OBP and a .595 slugging percentage to add up to a 1,008 OPS. In his first 6 seasons in baseball, that is the second time he finished with an OPS over 1,000. And then after finishing 12th in an MVP race that would eventually, or in 2017, in a race that would see Giancarlo Stanton win the MVP. Bryce Harper was named an All-Star for the 5th time in his first 6 seasons in the league, and of course doing it all while he was a member of the Nationals. After winning the National League East, they would go on to lose to the Cubs, the defending World Series champs, and this was the year that the Dodgers made it to the World Series out of the National League and eventually ended up losing to the Houston Astros. This is the Astros' second title in their history. Following that, this would transition into Bryce Harper's seventh and final season with the Washington Nationals. In 2018, in his age 25 season, Bryce Harper would play 159 games in a season where the Nats finished with an 82-80 record. They would miss the playoffs completely. And in his seventh and final season, he would go on to make his sixth All-Star game. The only All-Star game in which he made the only season in which he didn't make an All-Star game was this season, and he played 100 games, which is 62 less than he could have played. But regardless, in the 159 games he played in his final season in Washington, he would go on to finish with 137 hits, which is 22 less hits than games played. He finished with 103 runs, which is the second time in his MLB career he eclipsed 100 runs in a season. He would finish with, in addition to his 103 runs, he finished with 34 doubles, the second most doubles he ever put together in his MLB career, and the second time he eclipsed 30 doubles. He finished with 34 home runs, the second time in his career he eclipsed 30 home runs, and he finished with 100 RBIs. This would be the first time that Bryce Harper had ever finished with 100 RBIs in a season. He would lead the league in walks for the very first time in his MLB career. He was walked 130 times. He would go on to strike out 169 times. This would be a lot of strikeouts on the year. He would have more strikeouts than hits for the first time in his MLB career. He would finish with a 249 batting average, which is the second lowest batting average he finished in his second lowest batting average in his career at that point, and even to date. He would go on to finish with an 889 OPS. He finished with a 339 on-base percentage and a 496 slugging percentage. He will go on to be named an All-Star, like I said, for the sixth time in his 7 years there. He actually has not been named an All-Star since he left the Washington Nationals. But following his 7-year stint in which he was an All-Star 6 of the 7 years and very well could have been all 7, he would go on to sign a $300 million deal to play with the Philadelphia Phillies. And even though the Phillies have yet to make the playoffs since he's been there, the Nationals would actually go on to win the World Series the year after he left. But this isn't a Nationals profile. This is a Bryce Harper one. Bryce Harper's very first season in Philadelphia would be his age 26 season in 2019, his 8th season in the league. And in 2019, Bryce Harper would go on to play 157 games in a season where the Phillies finished with an 81 record in Gabe Kapler's second season of being the manager. In Bryce Harper's first season in Philly, we would play 157 games. He had 149 hits in those 157 games. That's 8 less hits than games played. He finished with 98 runs. This would be the third season in a row, and the fifth time in his 8-season career, he's finished with at least 90 runs on the season. He finished with 36 doubles, which at that point was the second most doubles he ever put together in a season, and the third time he's put together 30 doubles in a 5-year stretch. He finished with 35 home runs on the year. This would be the third time in his career that he finished with at least 30 home runs. Second year in a row, he finished with at least 30 as well as he finished with 30 home runs and 100 RBIs for the second year in a row, as he had 114 RBIs in 2019. His first season in Philadelphia brought him the most RBIs he'd ever have in a season to date. He would finish the season with a 260 batting average and an 882 OPS. He will go on to miss the All-Star game and the playoffs, as Bryce Harper would still go on to put together a very solid season in terms of his career numbers. Following the 2019 season, he would go on to play the 2020 season, which many people are aware was impacted by COVID to the point where they had to shorten the 162-game season to 60 games for every single team. But as a result, they did expand the playoff. In 2020, in Bryce Harper's age 27 season, he would play 58 games in a season where the Phillies would finish with a 28-32 season. They would go on to miss the playoffs anyway. But in the 58 games he played, he would finish with 51 hits, 7 less hits than games played. He finished with 41 runs in those 58 games. 9 doubles, 13 home runs, 33 RBIs. He would go on to lead the National League in walks for the second time in his career. The last time he did it was his last season in Washington. And then to conclude the season, he finished with a 268 batting average and a 962 OPS. This will be the third time in his career he finished with an OPS above 900, as his on-base percentage was at 420, the second highest in his career at that point. And he finished with a 542 slugging percentage, which was the third highest slugging percentage at that point in his career. And then this would all lead into Bryce Harper's most recent season, in his age 28 season, where he played 141 games for a Philadelphia Phillies team that finished with an 82-80 record and completely missed the playoffs. This was his third full year with the team, and he still has yet to make the playoffs as a member of the Phillies. In the 141 games he played this season, he finished with 151 hits. That's 10 more hits than games played. He finished with 101 runs at the conclusion of the season. That's the third time in his career he's finished with at least 100 runs, and this would go down as the sixth time in his MLB career he finished with at least 95 runs on the year. He finished with 42 doubles, which is the most doubles that he's ever put together in a season, and he went on to lead the National League in doubles, tying for the MLB lead in doubles. He finished with 35 home runs at the conclusion of the season, tied for the second most he's ever put up in a season. He finished with 84 RBIs. This would go on to be the sixth time in his MLB career he's posted at least 80 RBIs in a season. He was walked 100 times. This would be the fourth time in his MLB career he's been walked 100 times. He finished with a 309 batting average. The third time in his MLB career he finished with a batting average over 300. He finished with a 429 on-base percentage and a 615 slugging percentage, the second highest slugging percentage and the second highest on-base percentage he's ever put together in his career, second to his MVP season. He didn't lead the National League in on-base percentage, but he did lead the National League in slugging percentage for the second time in his career, and he led it in on-base percentage with it being at 1044. He led the National League in on-base plus slugging percentage on OPS plus with 179. His MVP season, his OPS plus was 198. And that really kind of concludes the season. He wasn't necessarily named an all-star, but many people were continually singing the praises of Bryce Harper this season, as he did have an amazing season, which goes on par with some of his best individual performances. But that brings us to where we are right now. Bryce Harper is turning 29, as he has played a full decade's worth of baseball, and he's definitely on his way to putting up some amazing numbers in the long run, and I'm just glad to have seen the type of player that he's become over this time. I first want to thank the Pro Baseball Reference websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I needed, and of course the MLB website. I want to, of course, take this time to wish Bryce Harper a happy 29th birthday. You ever get a chance to watch him, he's wearing number 3 for the Philadelphia Phillies, and he is one of the best players in baseball. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope all is well, and if you ever get a chance, watch Bryce Harper. He is one of the league's best, and considering how hard it is to make it to the MLB, to be this good is very impressive. Thanks once again for listening to this feed, and once all of today's episodes are done, I will come back tomorrow on October 17th for another episode of The Elite, as Jamal Adams, the safety for the Seahawks, also has a birthday. He turns 26 tomorrow. Thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another episode tomorrow. Peace out.